All right, let's start this.
There is a difference between like white pride and black pride. Like, if we're honest, the histories between these two things are different, and generally the sentiments behind them are different, right?
What is the
Like,
difference?
I think the difference is that generally white people are pretty okay in the United States on the qualification of being white. Now there are poor white people, but their lives aren't because they're white; they're poor. Or there might be white people that are addicted to drugs, but their lives aren't because they're white; they're because they're hooked to opiates. Whereas for black people, African Americans specifically, descendants of slaves, a lot of their lives today are still a little bit not because their parents were poor or their grandparents were poor, but
And like they they're like African American exists as a term because they didn't know their ancestry, right? They were brought here unconsensually against their will and then kind of forced to stay here for generations, and then that family history was kind of lost, you know? So like in America, like black is an identity much more black is an identity and a shared culture within the country much more than like whiteness is, you know? Because we have like the white, oh my god, I fucked it up. Like white immigrants, like they came here by choice, you know, they know where they came from. But let's continue.
because there were racial policies of the United States from 64 and earlier that actually like racially impacted people. So I'm very empathetic
So you
or
only
sympathetic.
get to have pride if you struggle. I mean, like
I'm not saying you can
see
only.
that
Like,
that's
here's
that is what you're
well,
saying,
no, no, no.
though.
Hold on, no. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that like I can understand people treating the things a bit differently,
Sure.
but the problem is that people take it a little bit too far. And instead of saying like, well, hold on, I think that there needs to be a special, unique place for Black people to talk about their place in the U.S. and the history in the U.S. That
Oh,
evolved
I
into
fucked that up.
white people. They can't talk about anything related to whiteness, and now we're only going to talk about black issues. And if you even dare challenge that, you're racist. Like that evolution is very toxic, and I think that that change is what has like destroyed so many of the conversations. Um,
Yeah, I feel like that's just kind of like I don't know. I feel like that's kind of like a little like a culture war-y answer. Like I feel like you can make the distinction like why black pride is more acceptable than white pride, and it has like it you can avoid like the struggles of them existing in America completely, right? While like the struggles of African Americans like do lead to them having like a shared culture. I feel like the shared culture of black Americans doesn't exist just because they've struggled, you know? I'm gonna fuck this jump up again. God damn it.
Thinking back like to the phrase like it's okay to be white, like the response to that should have just or like white lives matter, the response to that should have just been like, yeah, they do, but like that's not what we're talking about right now, and like that's it, instead of like, no, you can't say that, that's hateful. It's like, why fight against that? Like, it's so stupid.
Right. I didn't quite follow you there at the end. I mean, I don't. I mean, I there is a
I won't lie. I haven't really watched any Richard Spencer content, but I like his voice. Like I know he used to be like a white supremacist. I think I don't really know what he's doing now, but like he's like if I wasn't listening to the words necessarily, like the voice, it's a good voice.
like also a kind of double standard of when someone has Irish pride or something like that. It's
Mm.
like, oh, that's so cool and beautiful and poetic and things like that. Someone says they have German pride and they people have a little bit of a different opinion, or Russian pride because it's bigger and stronger and more powerful and can actually affect the world. Unlike I don't know, Irish Catholic nationalism or something like that. But you can't just say, okay, it's good if it's weak and it's bad if it's strong. I mean, it's a natural human tendency to want to be a part of a bigger tribe, something
Just
bigger
like
than
have
yourself,
American pride.
a
You don't need to have white
civilization
pride.
even. And so it can't
I'm an
just be
idiot.
justified if people are not politically powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on the type of movement you're in and like where you're coming from. Like, because realistically, like when somebody says white pride, I don't really know like white people as a group historically. I don't like. It's hard to know what that means. Like, if you want to talk about like German people, Russian people, Irish people, like there are achievements and things that you can give to specific nationalities, specific
Even
ethnicities,
like
specific
certain white
groups.
people were
But it feels like when
discriminated
people talk
against when
about
like they
white
first
as an
immigrated here.
overarching group, at least in my mind, the only thing I think of is slavery. Because I'm like, well, what did
Right.
white people do versus like
or you
black
think
people?
you think it's almost too generic and kind of
Yeah, that's the
vague. Like,
issue.
what
And then
is-
when
what
somebody
does it-
appeals to
what does it
something-
mean? You go to Target as opposed to the dollar store? You're white or
Mhm.
something?
Yeah.
You know, I agree with that.
Whereas I think and
I-
then there's a slight difference too, because when you talk about like African American culture, there was a unifying culture between.
this is a much-
descendants of slaves, because
much
a lot of
better
them can
answer.
Point back to the countries they're from, and so their culture basically starts at my great 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 granddaddy was a slave, and that's all I have. And here's the culture that I was thrust into, that was thrust upon me, and then this is what we created out of that. And so I'm more sympathetic to. I understand why some people are like, I have African American pride, but it feels a little bit different. It's like I have white pride. It's like, okay, well, you can go to Ellis Island, you can see like exactly where your family came from. Like your pride is going to be a little bit more ethnically precise than that. And when you just say white pride, it feels a little bit strange, you know?
I get what you're saying, and I'm being sympathetic towards it. I have many of the same criticisms. One of the criticisms that I do agree with that you hear from the left is, you know, they'll show some image of some, you know, fatso
It's
slavery
broken!
pride or yelling at someone, and they'll be like, this is the white supremacist, you know. And then there's also that other kind of question of like, what are you actually standing for? What do you want?
Yeah.
I think that was a major question, the why question about the alt-right and why it failed and is kind of part of the past now, is because it couldn't answer. There was no like actual spiritual core to what whiteness is.
Which
I think that's
so many
very true.
movements have that issue. Remember Occupy
Yeah.
Wall Street? What the
Yes.
fuck did they want? That was a huge fervor, and it came and it went, and like, what the fuck did you guys want? Or BLM and the riots and the police. Like, what did you guys want? To abolish policing? They tried that in some places, it didn't work. Like, what did you guys want? The alt-right, Charlottesville, and everything. Well, what do you guys want? And it's like,
Exactly.
more Christianity, Catholicism? Not that. What more, like what? Like, yeah, there's an issue with a lot of
I agree.
misdirected anger today, where it's like, channel it on something and figure out a policy or something to rally by. Maybe legalize like marijuana or something, but find something that you want to champion.
Well,
Otherwise,
that's
it's
because America isn't offering that anymore. So when you think about, okay, I mean, I'll do two things real quick. So just, you know, be a little patient. So there is a white identity to the United States that is, I would say, overwhelmingly Protestant and overwhelmingly Anglo. And there were a lot of nativist battles against, you know, bringing in Italians and Central Europeans and so on in the 19th century. Between about from the Immigration Act of 1924 and let's say up to the 60s, I think there, and this was also coming after the progressive reforms that did a lot of great things in my opinion. But anyway, I think there was a pretty coherent white American public. It was perhaps fleeting. It was kind of more Christian than Protestant, more European than Anglo-Saxon, but it was a real thing. But I also think that like grasping onto that, holding on to it is kind of clinging to the past. I think we've moved beyond that period of time. It was a great time in many ways. It was a bad time if you were African American, or not so bad, but bad in many ways if you're an African.
Chinese, or depending on where you were.
I get it. But it was something, and I think that was probably the essence of the "Make America Great Again" notion. It was about again going back to the past, rehearsing something. But I think the main thing is that America is not able to offer any overarching, coherent vision that's attractive, that's irrational, even, that's exciting, Dionysian. And thus, we're kind of retreating into this like fragmented societies of BLM angst, alt-right angst, Fuentes Yay angst, screw the patriarchy angst. They're probably literally screwing the patriarchy. That's anyway.
I feel-
but because we're not offering anything. When John Winthrop, before he even set foot on this,
The
soil,
Golden City
he had
on a
an
hill.
idea of what America
God, I
was.
love
It was this
American
New
propaganda.
Jerusalem concept. It was a highly fundamentalist, puritanical notion, one that I don't resonate with, to be honest. But it was something. He defined it even before he was here. We've had various ways in the Cold War. I mean, I have this article I'm going to publish, but it's about how U2 kind of predicted the Cold War or ended.
I went for the hop and I
in
didn't
some
need
crazy
to.
way. Though we're torn in two, we can be one. They sang that in 1983 before 1989, 91, and everything changed. And so they were imagining some vision that you wanted to come be a part of. And I think for Bono and U2 is actually deeply Christian. This is there has to be something there, or we are going to fragment into things like BLM and the alt-right.
So here, this is something also that I kind of think in terms of. So earlier I alluded to this idea that I feel like the idea of a unified America was a bit illusory. I feel like we felt that way, or we feel like in the past it was that way. So Adam, when you talk about like hip hop and you talk about like rappers, I feel like one thing that's really important for a lot of these guys, that a lot of kind of middle class America, and I feel like people have lost, is where you're from.
Oh yeah,
It's,
huge.
yeah, but I think that I feel like in the United States, I feel like we used to be a lot more local. But again, because of the internet, I think something happened to where now.
I don't think he's going to mention it. So I think, and I said, I feel like I pre-watched this, and so I know I have disagreements, or I wouldn't watch it. I think a lot of this is due to like the lack of the third place. Like not necessarily that like, oh, people like, I don't think necessarily you have to have like a religion to like have like a coherent community, but like the church was the place where like everyone congregated, you know? Like we'd all meet at church, we'd all hang out at church. Now that like, where do you do that? Like the bar, clubs, like you're not like, these aren't very like social. And like even then, like you go to a bar, you're like going with your friends to hang out with your friends. Like you're not really like you might go there to meet new people, but that's not like the main goal all the time, you know? Like a lot of times it's like, oh, me and the boys are gonna go to the bar and hang out. Maybe we'll talk to some honeys, but like I'm not gonna talk to my neighbor in the way that I would because they're sitting next to me at church, you know? And I don't think that has to do with because it's church. It's just a place where people can go and be together, you know?
Oh, the only thing everybody knows Marjorie Taylor Greene. Everybody knows, like, if you ask like a conservative in Wyoming or Montana or whatever, like,
Yes.
which politician do you hate the most?
Yeah,
They're
no one
gonna
gives a
talk to you
fuck about
like,
local
people in the
politics anymore
House of
either.
Representatives in
I don't
New
think
York.
anyone
Yes.
They're gonna
did.
talk to you about
Maybe
people
like
who
before
have
like
no impact on their
a lot of
local
internet and shit they didn't,
and
but
I think that there's an illusion I think that's created in the past America where everybody's involved in their own communities and their own churches and their own unions and their own local politics scene, and you feel like you're kind of a unified America. Even
he's
though
not using it, but these are all
they might
third
totally
places. This would be
things,
considered.
but in their own communities, they've achieved some sort of equilibrium where they feel comfortable and confident. But now, local politics, everybody's on this national level, and no way can you get 340 million people to all feel the same about anything.
But in a weird way, we all do feel the same. It's kind of both because, you know, like a rancher in Wyoming, because he's on social media to some degree, is going to be like, those BLM riots, they're burning down cities, like Antifa's coming from, and it's like, listen, let me, as someone who was assaulted by Antifa, I can tell you, like, they are not coming to rural Montana, like, just,
Sure.
you know, let you know.
But I mean, on that
we're
same
all
thing, though-
immediate, we're brought together in this kind of incredible way.
Yeah, but in like but in a horrible way.
Like an
Because
incredibly
you realize that,
antagonistic
like, if you
way.
were to poll a ton, like this is something. Oh my God, my mind. I changed so many opinions on politics when I realized this. Is if you're trying to figure out what Americans feel like, first of all, get rid of the idea of Americans. Number one.
Dude,
And number
the
two,
ramp is
stop looking at
broken.
national polling data because we don't vote national on anything. We vote for our representatives, we vote for our senators, and then we vote within our states for things. And when you start looking more granularly at American opinion, you start to realize more why things are the way they are. You might think that, like, well, 52% of Americans support the legalization of marijuana.
Yeah, but
or
most of those
prostitution
Americans are
or
in
gun
fucking
control or whatever. But when you look at state by
California and
state,
New
you're like,
York.
okay, hold on, this breaks down way differently depending on where you're looking at things.
But that's changing.
But we're trying to
opposite trend
force.
is happening.
Yeah, it might be, but the problem is we're trying to force our national views on everything, where we still have a system, whether we like it or even acknowledge it, that still very much works on the local level. I think BLM and policing is a really good example. We tried to come together as a country and make strong statements on policing, but policing is decided by your mayor. These
Right.
are your most local elections. Obama's not going to fucking save you from a bad cop.
Right.
Trump's not going to do shit about an unfair process.
I'd also say this is like a reason that people like don't fuck, was I just gonna say? Oh my God, did I just forget? I did, god damn it.
Prosecution, but we all are looking at
Hold on,
obsessing
rewind
at
it,
that.
rewind it.
We're trying to
opposite trend
force.
is happening.
Oh,
it
yeah.
might-
This is probably why like there's been like a big rise of like distrust in mainstream media and like a rise in alternative media is that like these big news stations, like national news, right, is kind of like dominated by like the coastal elite. So if you're like a middle American, right, just living in the middle of the country, and you have fucking someone from California telling you like all their opinions, you're gonna be like, wait, like I don't think like this, my family doesn't think like this, my friends don't think like this, like this isn't a representation of me. And then that is probably just gonna lead to distrust because you feel like these people don't understand you. So how are they gonna present the problems to you in a way that you're gonna that is making sense, you know?
Be, but the problem is we're trying to force our national views on everything where we still have a system, whether we like it or even acknowledge it, that still very much works on the local level. I think BLM and policing is a really good example. We tried to come together as a country and make strong statements on policing, but policing is decided by your mayor. These
Right.
are your most local elections. Obama's not going to fucking save you from a bad cop.
Right.
Trump's not going to do shit about an unfair prosecution. But we all are looking and obsessing at that national level, and then nobody looks at their local communities. And now we're like, well, I feel like we don't get along like we ever did before. It's like, I don't know if anybody from New York City in the year 1892 would have gotten along with somebody from.
But they wouldn't, right? What he's saying is like they wouldn't get along, but they got along with the people in their community. They would see their neighbors all the time. They would like at least once a week everyone's congregating in one place to hang out, you know? And now that just doesn't exist. So even within your community you feel isolated.
Some rural place, some rancher in Texas, but it felt like they did because they never talked to each other. They never had the opportunity to be exposed to each other.
Let me try to bring some of these things together because you're bringing up some very important topics. So America has never been a coherent nation, and it's never been a nation state at all. It has always been an empire in some degree or another.
Sure.
So there's actually a thinker who's out of favor now, who I think is a genius, Frederick Jackson Turner, with this notion of the frontier. So in European languages, if you're, let's say, a Prussian and you have the word frontier, that means border. That means you've got to face off against the Russian Empire, France, some naval invasion, all that kind of stuff. In America, frontier means the opposite. It means endless open space, which we had. You can just go out there and make a new world, and if you can survive...
Oh, I'm just dumb.
We actually went downward in terms of civilization. So in Boston, you're riding trolley cars and reading the Gospels, and you start to go out into the wilderness and you're rowing a canoe and reading the Old Testament. So we've almost like gone backwards as you go out into the frontier. So and you can see this despite progressives who kind of FDR as well kind of nationalized many things, made us more of a European coherent nation. That's not who we are. We do have a kind of outmoded political system on some level. It's at very least not a political system conducive to a nation state.
Sure.
We'll never be Finland.
A coherent, singular identity. Yeah.
Right.
But that's kind of what I wonder when we talk about like.
And the irony of it is that we are being nationalized. I agree. Like a guy in Maine or a guy in Wyoming who are both kind of right wing types. They both hate AOC and think she's going to go take their guns or, whatever. So it's like we're going through all of these forces, and I think there's also the contradiction between the ability to deal with domestic issues and then America's identity as a global empire. Like since 1944 at the very least, and probably before that, we've set the terms for the world. The world cannot function without us and the dollar. And I'm not just saying this as some wild
or
American
would function in a very different
jingoist.
way. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it would be horrible if this thing went down. All of these Ron Paul types or tankies or liberals saying, like in the American empire or whatever, they don't know what that will actually entail and a lot of horrors that would entail. So America's always been this frontier in this sense of expansion and globalism. It is what we are. And so there's that contradiction between like domestic affairs and our obligations as imperialists. You hear this with Hawley of, we need a party about East Palestine and not a party about the globalist in Ukraine or something. Well, actually, as an American,
we need both.
Obviously you need both, to some degree. But as an American, you actually do need to think about Ukrainians, and not just out of sympathy, which I definitely have.
But like these countries,
the fact that you have,
like there's like, it's not just being like an Amerocentrist. We're the good guys. Like these countries do look to America for like like guidance or at least like help or some at some point like leadership, right? Like we kind of like just and that's kind of like the role we inserted ourselves in post World War I, World War II. Like we had a heavy hand in reconstructing Europe, a heavy hand in reconstructing Japan. Like these countries are like they're not like dependent on America, but like in a way they are, you know? Like on their on American foreign policy.
Have an imperial obligation to think about them.
Mhm.
And I think we have this, like one of the kind of contradictions of populism is, in some ways, Trump was an expression of the decline of America. Not necessarily through his actions, but through his rhetoric of like, come home, take care of ourselves, let's spend money on ourselves. Americans are dreamers, no more immigration, build a wall.
Mhm.
All of these things are kind of like, on
The
some level,
shriveling of an
retreat.
insect,
just
the
a fucking
dying of
Yeah.
yeah.
And even Trump, when he was a better version of Trump in the 80s, when he was on Larry King or whatever, he was still kind of like that. This nationalism of kind of bringing things in. It might have something to do with the fact that he came from Manhattan. It's this kind of like pitched battle.
Maybe, but I mean, like, look at his
But-
investments. Like, the guy spends money and makes money like all over the world too, right? Like,
No
he's
question.
so, yeah.
Yeah, no question. Russia. Yeah.
I think in terms of what you're
but-
talking about, the thing that I guess I'd like to appeal to, I guess circling back to what I said before, is it feels like we're so divided today. But in 1950, like how often was like a Jewish guy from New York debating a guy that lives in like New Mexico?
Right.
It's never happening. So the division might have existed, but we didn't see it because those people weren't brought together. But now we've taken this version of the American experiment. We've got so many different people living in our country, which we've made work, and that's awesome.
Yeah, but I'm just gonna keep like because like think about it. When in your life is there things like that like the whole community is a part of, right? Like there'll be like farmers markets and stuff like that. And if you engage in probably if you engage like you go to the farmers market on Wednesday, you go to church on Sunday, you fucking I don't. This is the problem with America. I don't even know what other places where people can congregate, right? But even if you do those, like your farmer market one day, church on the next, right? I would argue that your like the level of coherency that you feel like America experiences would be much higher because you're like integrated with your community and like and when in that sense you are like it is like the unified America in the sense that we're all small communities unified with each other. But now it's like people aren't going to church, people aren't going to the farmers markets, we're just all in our Twitter communities, so it feels like we don't even we're like what Destiny's saying where like back in the day it felt like you were unified because you weren't talking to people that you were that you were ununified with. I would say that well you felt unified because you were unified within like your own community and that and you would extrapolate that to like well if I feel like this then people wherever the fuck probably feel like this because we're all kind of relatively doing the same thing just in different places. But now that's very much not the case.
But now we're like bashing heads on everything, and I guess it feels so lame because it feels like such a libcuck thing to say. But I feel like at the end of the day, what we have to appeal to is America has only worked so far, and it will only continue to work if you can accept that some of the people living in your country are Nazis, and some of the people living in your country and hate white people and want them to die. And it sucks, but as long as they're not calling for either side to be killed, you have to accept that these people are all going to live here and the country has to function.
Yeah, but the non-aggression principle is not enough. Like, I agree that that's reasonable and that we could kind of get along and maybe even kind of laugh at each other. I think there's something to be said even for
Just
like,
this is the
meanness
jump I fuck up
that
every time.
comes from like telling an anti-Italian joke with your Italian friend, like you're kind of making fun of him, but in a way you're kind of both being human in a way. So I get that, but it's not enough. There has to be an overarching meaning of what it means to be an American. America is an ideological nation, just like the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was able to coherently do that. They attracted the minds.
But they didn't.
But
That's why
because
they fell
lost
apart,
it.
right? Yeah.
Right, but they lost it.
But I think because
and
part
they
of the
collapsed immediately.
But
when
part
they
of the
lost
pursuit of that,
legitimacy.
part of the pursuit of that though was like the hardcore Russification of all of the little territories and states that they took over. And I think that's part of why it wasn't like the Soviet Union naturally grew out and expanded as it, expanded its empire and its ideology. A lot of it was literally like half of you guys died from a famine. We're going to go ahead and ship 2 million Russians down to Ukraine. We're going to go ahead and take over all of your governments in Lithuania, Estonia. We're going to go ahead and do that. And so of course, over time, like the people there never felt like they truly had to buy into the Soviet Union. They were just kind of like subjugated by the Soviet Union. It's like, okay, well, we're here until the Soviet Union falls apart, and now we're leaving immediately, which I think happened when the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union collapsed.
That's true to a great extent. There was also a kind of nation building thing of creating nations that didn't exist, giving them national poets. There's kind of countervailing forces, and obviously when they were invaded by the National Socialist Army, there was a call in the motherland and all that kind of stuff. Russian nationalism. Russians are kind of more equal than.
Oh, and to your
others.
point, Russians still define themselves largely as we beat Nazis, and that's like
Yes.
their
That's
unifying
their
calling
only
card.
And
Yeah,
it's that negative identity that you almost see against with Americans as well, where it's like liberalism can't assert anything, so it becomes this kind of donut or bagel with a hole in it. So you can't really define, like, this is what it means to be a man in America right now. This is what it really means. Don't give me the non-aggression principle or I'm tolerant or whatever. This is what it means that my life has meaning. America isn't offering that. It's this liberalism, it's this kind of donut.
Yeah, and I think it's not offering that because
Can't assert anything.
you don't interact with your community anymore. Like you don't even feel like you're a part of your community. How are you supposed to feel like you're a part of America?
Morality. That sucks, and that will collapse. And I think the Soviet example is very interesting in this regard. You can't just define yourself on the basis of we beat the Nazis.
So what does so I still reject this. I hope I'm idealistic because I would hope that we can do something that doesn't require a common enemy. But like, if it had to be one, like what would it be?
Islam could play that role.
Jeez.
Jesus
I think
Christ.
that won't work anymore actually because now all these conservative simps. It's so goddamn funny because 4 years ago I fought against so many conservatives who were like, I think that women are sluts and they shouldn't do this. I'm like, listen, bro. And I'd say this just to trigger the fucking. It kind of sounds like you're talking about Sharia law. And like, no, we don't mean that. We would never do that. Blah blah. But now you've got all these
They're
Tate
coming
fans.
together.
Yeah, like actually, Muslims are pretty based.
Yeah,
Women
dude.
can't drive.
Andrew
they're
Tate,
not
my
allowed to have
favorite
sex
Muslim who
politically
owns a
sometimes,
gambling
like, they have to stay in the
business.
household. Like,
That's
I don't
not
know,
haram
maybe
at all.
Tate was right when he converted. I was like, what the guys? Like 5 years late to the show, so I don't even know if you could get conservatives on that one.
No,
but-
It's-
now, I think Andrew Tate phenomenon is actually incredible because he's the biggest man slut on earth on one direction. He's
Gambling,
also-
haram shit.
Right,
Yeah.
he's
Runs
a
casinos.
criminal in another direction. He is a Muslim on another direction, and a masculinity icon. I mean, yeah, it's crazy. But so I don't think the Islam thing will work, although that was tried to some extent. But I think Russia as a big bad enemy is a positive manifestation, and I think Putin could kind of serve that purpose. But there also has to be this assertion of who are we.
In opposition to whoever we fight against. Right?
Yeah, it's in opposition, but it's also an assertion. It's not an argument, and it's not about tolerance, not about liberalism. It's an assertion of identity. Identity is not an argument. Identity is an assertion.
Sure.
And that is what we need.
Is there any common ground that really stands out to you in terms of Americans, like stuff that we really can agree on? Because it is hard to find almost anything.
Yeah.
I don't think so, actually. And this is always my biggest argument against Fuentes, because, and anytime I would debate somebody on the very far right, I'd say, we need to defend our Eurocentric, whatever, American identity. It's like, give me some common values between, like, the gayest dude in San Francisco and, like, a farmer in rural Texas. And, like, you just can't. And the reality is, like, I can point to countries around the world where conservatives are going to be way more aligned with, like, Saudi Arabian values versus, like, the Rainbow Road and fucking Seattle people's values or whatever. And the reality is that, like, yeah, it's really hard to find a unifying identity in the United States. And again, it's the gayest thing I've ever said, but, like, I really do think it is all of the different opinions that we have here that still function under one system that makes us, like, truly unique as a country. But I mean, maybe it's not enough. I don't know. Like, do you ever play PlayStation or Xbox or
You
whatever?
need just like you need some sense of community, right? Whether like I can't believe he doesn't like. I don't know why does he just not know the term? Like I feel like the third place is really just like what you need. Like you go work, you go to home, and then you just need somewhere else to interact with your community. Like if you're hanging out with your neighbors all the time, having a good time, maybe not even just like your neighbors, but everyone that lives in like your town, you know? Like that's kind of like impossible now because like even small towns are like 30,000 people in big states, you know? But in these more like rural areas where there are small towns and like most, if like at least like half can congregate in one place, I feel like that increases the sense of like I feel unified. Maybe not as an American, but as a San Franciscan or a Georgian, you know, like one of like a more local identity, and then that local identity is within America. So by default, you know, that would just make you feel American. Even though the way you're feeling American with your community in California is probably different from the way you're feeling American with your community in Colorado or some shit.
This fucking drove me crazy as a kid. You could never just play one or the other. You had to hate the other group too. You ever notice that? It's like, oh yeah, I play PlayStation. It's like
Super
true.
Nintendo and
Halo.
for me, but yeah.
Oh sure, yeah. Everybody
Mortal
would always,
Kombat 2 didn't have blood on the Super Nintendo, but it did on Genesis.
Oh.
So we were looking. I was a Super Nintendo guy too, and this was just an example where clearly I had to get a fucking Game Genie if I wanted the blood to
put
be
blood
the right
in?
color. Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise it'd be green.
Yeah.
I remember that.
I was deeply offended.
But yeah, it feels like every time when you're in a group, it's like, why can't you just like yourselves? It happens a lot with the CRT and the anti-black stuff, where it's like white people. It's like, bro, why can't you just be happy for yourselves? Like, do you really have to? Or for white people and hating black people.
It's because we're animals. I don't. We're mammals, and that's why we do that. I mean, that's
You and me, baby, we ain't nothing but mammals.
I'm not saying that we should do this like merely on tribalism or like, you know, I hate my neighbors because they're, you know, they root for a different football team or whatever. What I'm arguing for is there does need to be a bigger ideological assertion.
Or even, yeah, that's fucking like football games, baseball games. That probably, if you're someone who goes to those frequently, you probably feel way more like connected with your community, just like on like the tribalism team sports line, you know? Like we're all rooting for the 49ers or whatever the fuck, you know? I'm just an idiot.
I think this might come in a way after we go through this period. I think Biden, you know, he's managing things. It's just fine, but I think we're all kind of aware that we're kind of at the end of something.
Maybe.
And you know, what's going to come after that? I think there are going to be some competing visions for a world order. Obviously, communism was a competing vision for a world order. Fascism.
My God, I'm dumb.
Islam can do that. It can function in that way. It has in the past. And it can create some discipline in society.
I feel like something that sucks today, and maybe it was an artifact, or maybe it happened in the history too. I don't know. But it feels like everything today is so politicized that it's really, really, really hard that we can't take credit for sick shit that we do anymore. Like in '69, landing on the moon was really cool. That must have been a really cool day to be an American when you're sitting down and you're watching TV.
Even now, when I like go on Twitch or some shit and I see NASA streaming and we're launching a rocket into space, I'm like, fuck yeah, bro. We're going to sending astronauts to space. Hell yeah, God bless America, you know?
Landed on the moon. That's awesome shit. But nowadays, it feels like every American invention is immediately claimed or castigated based on your political rivalry. So, for instance, I might trigger you. I don't know where you guys stand on this. I personally think that the vaccination was like a model success of capitalism. That U.S. companies
fucked all my
through
speed.
innovation and working with other companies around the world, BioNTech in Germany, manufacturing in Switzerland, we found a way to create an insanely sophisticated vaccine in like 8 months.
It should have been like landing on the moon, right?
That's so cool, and it
like a
happened.
miracle.
Yeah, and Trump obviously wants credit for it, but like, no, that's political shit. Or I'll give the flip side, since I know a lot of right-leaning people are triggered right now. I personally, and I hate the guy because I think politically he's the most cringy dude in the world, but Elon Musk with electric cars and rockets are cool. That's awesome. The first time you saw one of those in SpaceX rockets come back and land on the planet, that was the sickest shit in the world. And same thing with electric vehicles. I mean, we probably would have gotten there eventually, but no doubt, I don't even like Teslas that much because the build quality is iffy, but he did something really cool with Teslas. There's charging stations all over the United States. Electric cars are being taken seriously. The car company is worth more than like every fucking car company on the planet, but we can't give credit. And these are American inventions. SpaceX and Tesla and the vaccine, these are American things, but it's all like held politically hostage now. So you said before we have to have like we have to have domestic and international, but it feels like the international facing version is like it's like two parents disciplining a child. Mom and dad can't provide a unified front when they're fighting with each other constantly.
Right.
And in the United States, when both sides are trying to tear each other apart, like how the can we even present some kind of unified front to the rest of the world? You know, now with Biden, we're talking about how we want to help Ukraine, we want to save them, we want to provide a strong American vision. And before under Trump, we were like, we want to disband NATO and fuck the rest of the world.
Right.
And you've got people like Angela Merkel and the Australian Prime Minister and the Mexican president saying like, well, we can't rely on America for shit anymore. And yeah, we're like schizophrenic in terms of domestic ideas. We hate each other so much that even when we accomplish good shit, we can't take credit for it. And it makes it impossible to provide like a unified vision of what America is and stands for to the rest of the world.
I agree.
I'm
Yeah.
just trolling.
I basically that's why I'm suggesting that we're kind of at the end of this era, because you do need to do that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think we need to. Well, I think we need to do. I don't know if we're at the end of an era. We always find a way to keep going on, but
Right.
A few publications were predicting like a vibe switch coming soon, and I think that was probably largely in terms of the arts or just people's overall disposition. But it does feel like the world as a whole is kind of growing tired of this sort of constant infighting and battling between both
Why am I
sides.
dumb?
and
Why am I dumb?
feels
Why am I
like there's
dumb?
Got to be something on the other side of it, but nobody's really sure how that could possibly manifest itself at this point.
because yeah,
I hope so.
Political pundits, we feed into each other what the media does and what people want. Like media wants to blame people for being stupid. People want to blame
I'm
the
just
media.
trolling.
They keep watching it. There has to start to be. There needs to be conscious decisions. I think it has to come from media first. And when I say media, I include alternative media as well. So people like you and me, you have to make the conscious decision to start to bridge gaps. Right? You can do partisan content for your entire life, but you are evil and you're destroying the country when you do that. When you do hyper partisan content, you are saying that like we are different from these people on a fundamental level. They're evil, we're good, and we're going to fight that fight and advocate for a national divorce or whatever some
Right.
people are fighting for. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you. We're Americans. You need to be able to talk to the guy that either wears a hood or wears a black hoodie and wants to kill cops or whatever. You have to be able to bring these people together and talk. And if you're not willing to do that, you are actively contributing to the destruction of the country, in my opinion.
I totally agree, and
I don't think that's necessarily true. Right? Cuz like I feel like that's kind of contradictory to his other points a little bit, cuz like you need to bring these two very opposite people together. Like why? Why like I'm not saying they should be divided, but why do they need to be brought together? Like what? Like they're not these two types of people probably inhabit very different locations geographically and like will be voting for different politicians, you know? And so it's like once again, like if you just like the unified front like among the community that you're a part of, you know? Like if we all live in one city and we can all like agree with each other on our things, then another one lives in another city and they all agree on their things, right? And this is coming back to like Destiny's point. I feel like then if you can accept that other people in other places of the country have different beliefs than you, that's fine. But I feel like there needs to be like unification within your community where you live.
I think there is space for someone who can lean out of polarization, because right now the most successful politicians just lean into it so hard and it just becomes nasty and meaningless. And there is a space, but again, it's like kind of an empty space, because I don't know, Biden hasn't quite successfily done that, even though he genuinely tried.
I give him credit
Maybe
for it for
just
trying
due to
it.
his age, basically, is why he isn't successful, but also why he tried,
Yeah.
because he can remember kind of back then.
Yeah, because he was a senator for like 7,000 years, right? And yeah, he's talked to and worked with.
He's also like, me and these segregationists, we used to get things done over in
They
Washington.
did,
We'd
yeah,
go to the
true.
old Ebbett Grill and have a liquid lunch,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean. Yeah, so I mean, that's who he is. I think Trump at his best kind of tried that.
I
And
wish he would.
The
See,
Ramps.
there were so many people on the campaign trail where it's like, are you going to turn it on and be the businessman that I think you can be?
right,
But-
but if you look at him most charitably, you could say he was kind of trying that, but he didn't. He leaned into it. He leaned into insane conspiracy cults at the end. I mean, it was a disaster.
I guess like You could say he kind of did, in the sense that the slogan was "Make America Great Again," and that kind of posits a unified America. But like anything else, I don't really think so.
But there is a kind of space for something, and that's why I do think that we need to talk about these things religiously, like a vibe shift or something. It's almost like the polar or the polar magnetism is going to switch or
yeah.
something. It switches every few thousand.
Really,
years.
vibe is like a new age word for spirituality.
Well, I
really
think
think about it,
there
right?
is-
Yeah.
there is some kind of collective consciousness and a collective mood, and I don't think I'm being like woo woo in saying that, in the sense of what is the kind of music that defines a period where you just hear it and you know where it is. Like if you think about the 80s and like synth pop or Madonna.
God, I fucking
or,
love
you
80s
know,
music.
Just can't get enough and all that kind of stuff. You're immediately kind of transported to that time. And at the same time, a kind of like the nihilism of punk, of like actively being out of tune and screaming and slamming your instruments, that also defined a particular era. And even if it wasn't the most popular music, it was the kind of it was the music that defined the vibe of that period. So I do think we act collectively in this way. I think that's a very real thing.
And it's interesting because like when I started doing hip hop podcasts, like 2016, so around the
But even then, those like they felt national, like, right, these music genres, like these vibes of an era felt national because they were being broadcasted, but these came from localized scenes. He's proving my point for me. They like, you had your fucking alt scenes and like your goth scenes, and you had these different groups, and they were unified among their community, and then they were broadcasted through the internet, through the tubes that lay through our ocean, and then people feel like they listen to these music, they resonate with this music, and they feel like they're unified across the country, even though the real unification is just like 4 dudes playing guitars and like 30 people in the small concerts, you know? Does that make sense? Oh my god, fucking Jimmy Neutron brain blast, holy shit.
same time that you were kind of invigorated with politics and in a different level. And generally, even within the hip hop community, almost everybody would agree that music at this point, hip hop is like incredibly bland, and that hip hop is ready for something new, something exciting, something that doesn't feel so stale.
Oh, and I
You just
fucking
have
still
no
suck at
idea what it
surfing.
is. And I kind of feel like that's the general overall theme, because when I interviewed Nick Fuentes, I was ready to be on Media Matters and ready to be torn apart for having a conversation with him, and nobody gave a and a few years ago, I would have been extremely worried about having a conversation with you. I'm quite sure nobody's going to give a It just feels like, in a lot of ways,
Surely they'll give a
they'll give us some kind of but it's just not going to be anything
Yeah,
that's
I'm probably
gonna
going to get
you know.
more heat for this conversation
Right.
than you will.
Well, don't you
Uh-oh. Twitch got some people.
Yeah, so yeah, I feel like, in summation, I feel like it's really just about the third place. You just need to be able to go to a place where you can chill with your neighbors and hang out. Not even necessarily the people that live in your community. And then through that, you feel like a unified America. You know, if we're all individually unified, you know, it's like, you feel like when you feel like you're a part of a small community, it can help you feel like you're a part of a big community, right? With like the music thing, like you're part of a small local scene, or you're not in the local scene, but you're tapped into some other local scene. You feel like you're connected, right? That makes you feel like, oh, wait, we're American, in the sense that these Idahoans are making some music and I'm listening to it in New Jersey, and like I feel connected. I'm resonating with their message. I feel connected with them. But yeah, nice.